Today on Inside Utah Politics, election results certified. County clerks reporting the outcome during the week. We're looking into what happened and why with the director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Plus, the CEOs of Twitter and Facebook on the hot seat in the nation's capital once again, facing questions about how they handled misinformation on their platforms during the election.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics, and we do begin today with Jason Perry. He's the director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics up at the University of Utah, here to help us make sense of this election. And Jason, it was a pretty wild one.
Oh boy, it was. You could not write this kind of story.
Yeah, no.
I mean, the roller coaster rides, the races, from the national politics to the locals, this is the kind of stuff we live for, Glenn.
Yeah, a lot of up and down in those final days. Let's start with the 4th Congressional District. Burgess Owens was successful in flipping that seat. Jason, I remember a while back, a lot of candidates looked at that race and said, no thanks, I'm not going to get into that. Burgess took the step and he was victorious. How was he able to do that?
Well, it's so interesting to see what's happened in this district, and a little bit of history as to how he got to where he was right now. You go back all the way to 2010, which is what's so interesting about this race. This was when the Republicans were in power. They were able to draw the lines. This was not intended to be a district that was easy for the Democrats. It never was, and that's why this is the 4th time that this congressional district has flipped. The 4th time, the 4th person, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. And this is really about the battle of a couple of counties. When people show up in Salt Lake County and Utah County, whoever really, it turns out these last 2 elections shows up the most, that's the party that when they pick is the one that's going to win.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little more. When we started seeing the late returns in Salt Lake County, you always figured those would break for McAdams. They didn't. Even the provisionals broke big for Republicans in Salt Lake County. How do you explain the difference? I mean, that was a complete opposite from 2018 to 2020. So how did that script flip?
There are a couple of things that were different in this election than it was in 2018. And one is you look at why people show up. Sometimes they show up for the person, sometimes they show up for the issue. If you look what happened in the last election cycle, a lot of people in Salt Lake County showed up for one big thing. Certainly Ben McAdams, but mostly they showed up for some initiatives, primarily medical marijuana. That was something that so many people showed up for in Salt Lake County. And that was a record turnout. That was somewhere around 82% in Salt Lake County in 2018. A lot of it was about the issues. Also the Independent Redistricting Commission, which may play a role yet again.
Yeah.
But people showed up for that.
Okay. We saw bigger numbers turn out in the south end of Salt Lake County and the north end of Utah County. Really, even more so in the north end of Utah County. How much of this is just the district growing and the demographic changing?
Well, that certainly played into this, and it's going to play into this district for a little while. Salt Lake City and the 4th district part of Salt Lake County has really become a lot of purple. A lot of Democrats are living there, but there's a few Republicans, as we turned out this time. A lot of Republicans and independents showed up last time. But Utah County is a force to be reckoned with. That's another difference between last election cycle and this one. You may recall, Glenn, there were lots of voting issues in 2018, which is why we saw 68% turnout in Utah County. This time it was about 89%. So we saw a lot of people showing up in Utah County to vote, and those votes largely went to Burgess Owens.
Let's talk and dig more into Salt Lake County. The county council, one Democrat who wasn't running against anyone else, is the only one that won on the Salt Lake County Council. How does Shireen Gorbani lose her seat on the Salt Lake City Council? The same reason for Ben McAdams, or is it different because she had countywide?
We're just really seeing this interesting impact down ballot. You look at what happened in the last couple of election cycles and the people who showed up. I think it was largely for those issues, but this time we saw people split their tickets. This is the first time, what's interesting in Utah, when you could not vote straight party. Sometimes we saw that in the last election cycles. You would show up and you picked your party. You couldn't do that this time, and I think that played a big role in this election cycle. People went person by person. Some people talk about, I just really went by issue and I went by person instead of just party. That's what happened right here, and the reality is there was no blue wave. People thought that was going to happen.
Yeah.
We've talked about maybe it was kind of a blue mirage because we thought some of these people were going to win. We thought Shireen Gorbani was doing very well up to the end. But in the end, the last minute voters, the people that showed up that last day, voted for the Republican candidates.
We also saw some House seats that looked like they were going to flip in House Districts 38 and 39 and even 45. Representative Elison was caught in a dogfight in District 45, but those all flipped again. And again, kind of goes back to my point, is how did the provisionals even break toward Republicans?
Well, they did this time. And you look at those local races, and this was by not very many votes. In fact, you talk about Representative Elison, for example, people are sending him condolence letters. They're saying, I'm sorry it didn't work out for you this time. But it turns out the people that voted late, the people who turned in their ballots late, the people that showed up the day of and cast their ballots, those people largely went to some of these Republican candidates. And most of these Republican candidates, the ones that were close, did end in the win. In the end, Representative Hutchings, who was the longest serving member of our House, was ousted. So there's one of those people that did lose right there. But by and large, that blue wave did not happen in Utah, and certainly across the country, we didn't see it either.
Ashley Matthews beating Hutchings for that seat in District 38. Okay, let's dig into this idea of the blue wave a little more. We saw a lot of controversy surrounded the state legislature when they started making changes to those initiatives. The tax reform bill was very unpopular and even repealed before it could go to a ballot measure. We heard so much from Democrats saying, we're going to come out and we're going to vote these people out of office. They only flipped one seat.
Yeah, none of that had what people thought was going to happen in this election. And I think you look at what happened nationally and then you compare that to what's happened locally too. I think that a lot of these races came down to what's happening right now for all of us. People have been forced to plant a political flag on so many different issues. When it comes to if your kids are in school, when it comes to masks, when it comes to your health care or the economy, people are concerned, and they're actually paying a lot more attention right now to the people who they think are going to be able to help with these key issues for them. I look at that as being a primary issue right here, and the reality is it's not just a matter of politics anymore. It's not just a matter of party anymore. It's about those key issues that people care about.
Let's look at the national scene. Outside of the presidency, a very good night for Republicans. How do you explain that?
Well, this goes to the fact that there were really no great coattails necessarily for Joe Biden. People thought that was going to be what was happening, as Democrats up and down the list were going to be able to do very well. And the reality is they didn't. It's because people made a choice. They made a conscious choice about who they're going to vote for. And there are several people in the country, lots of them it turns out, that were voting for Republicans. They voted for Republicans. They weren't voting for the President of the United States. That is just the difference. What people thought was going to happen absolutely did not happen. Republicans probably going to be able to retain control of the Senate because of that.
So now as we look to the Georgia runoff, that's going to be a key.
Yeah.
What are we going to be watching there? Because now all eyes on the country for control of the Senate are focusing in on Georgia, and it appears that money from all over the country is going to be influencing
this has become the race to watch in the country. I predict this is $100 million or so goes into this race. And when you look at what happened nationally and with the Senate, a lot of people are saying a divided government is good for business. It's good for the economy. When there are these checks and balances in place, that it's good for the country. I think that is the argument we're going to be hearing a lot over the next couple of weeks. This is going to be so interesting if this doesn't pull out for the Republicans, because this could end up sort of a 50-50 split in the Senate, which means the Vice President of the United States casts every deciding vote. The heart of what's going to happen for the Biden administration going forward, or for the Republicans, is all on Georgia right now. That race, those two races right there for the two senators, is going to change everything for the next 4 years.
And if you would look at the history, you would think at least one of them is going to win this runoff.
Well, I think that's highly likely. I mean, Purdue was so close, even before in the first round of voting going into this runoff election. It's really hard to imagine a time when at least one of those candidates is not going to come through on the Republican side.
Okay. Jason Perry, we always appreciate your insight. Thanks for being on the show today.
Glad to be with you.
Still to come, more on the national election results. What do they mean for both parties, and is a rebrand in order? Our panel will debate that a little bit later. But first, an alarming upward trend in suicide among those who have served our country. How lawmakers and advocates are trying to address the issue. Social media companies promised they would fight misinformation related to the election. On Tuesday, senators grilled the CEOs of Facebook and Twitter on precisely that issue. As Washington correspondent Alexandra Limon reports, senators say additional internet regulations may be needed.
Many Democrats and Republicans are in rare agreement that social media companies need new rules on how to operate. And Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg thinks so too.
I believe we are well overdue to update the rules for the internet.
Specifically, lawmakers question whether new regulations should address how social media companies handle users' personal information and privacy, social media addiction, and how those platforms handle elections. Facebook and Twitter said they took unprecedented steps this year to fight election misinformation. Many times, those policies resulted in flags on President Trump's posts.
Do you believe that label goes far enough to prevent the tweet's harms when the tweet is still visible and not accurate?
I do, because it's not just the surface level label. It points to a collection of news articles, of information and conversation.
While Democrats question whether that is enough, Republicans like Utah Senator Mike Lee say social media platforms are doing too much.
There are instances in which your platforms are taking a very distinctively partisan approach and not a neutral one.
Both CEOs admitted their companies have mistakenly flagged or blocked content or users. While lawmakers say more regulations are needed, they also worry about whether too much government involvement could create new problems. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
A new VA report shows the suicide rate for veterans ticked up, and the pandemic could bring those numbers even higher. Washington correspondent Basil John reports on why lawmakers and experts are concerned about this data.
Over 17 veterans a day take their own life.
Virginia Senator Mark Warner is concerned for the country's veterans as a new report from the VA shows the rising rate of veteran suicides.
Veterans are at an increased level of risk for suicide than the average American.
Retired Colonel Michael Hudson says the veteran suicide rate is almost 2 times higher than the civilian suicide rate.
We should be using modern technology and focusing that outreach at veterans as they begin to get into crisis.
The study also shows an increased risk for those who don't get help from the VA.
What we found is that 2/3 of these veterans who take their own lives have had no contact with the VA.
Warner's bipartisan bill expands veterans' access to mental health services to reduce the rate and increase outreach from the VA and nonprofits.
This is just an effort to marry these resources, and my hope is that we can bring these numbers down because they are still way too high.
This report does not include data from 2020, but Hudson and Warner say they expect the pandemic is making things worse.
I would be very afraid of seeing what the numbers might be this year.
In essence, as COVID ticks down, veteran suicide is not going to map directly to it. It's going to lag behind it.
And Hudson says the numbers could continue to rise as we get closer to the holiday season. Reporting in Washington, I'm Basil John.
Still to come, do both major political parties need to do some soul searching following the election results? Our panel will weigh in on that after the break. Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have an encore performance with former State Senator Jim DeBackus and former House Speaker Greg Hughes. And we also have Taco with us today. Jim, show everyone Taco.
Jeez, comfort pet. We have to have a comfort pet now. That's where we are.
Okay, so I have to have you guys on again this week because you took like 10.5 minutes on one topic last week and didn't get into this other stuff. Maybe that's your strategy to get back on the show.
He interrupts me, Glenn. That's the problem here.
All right, I want to talk about, after the dust settles, any need to rebrand for the two major political parties. Greg, let's start with you. What role do you see the president continuing to play in the party? And what role should he play for those that struggled with him?
Not since 1988, Glenn, have you seen a Republican candidate for president be competitive or win states like Pennsylvania and Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. We've seen the 2020 elections roll out. More than 10 million, I think 10 million people now is the count, have voted for Trump than did before. The takeaway, win or lose, is you have a Republican Party now that's competitive in states that it had not been competitive for a long time. And this is the reason. The Republican Party is the party for the everyday person.
But who carries the mantle from here on out? Because I'm going to give you another set of evidence. In the state of Utah, the president did not fare as well. He was lower than every single Republican statewide candidate. That's an indicator that some Republicans did not vote for him in Utah.
Sure, and look, and you have the president's approach that isn't welcomed by all. But look at this president significantly. He easily won the state of Utah. If you listen to some of the narratives, you would have thought that a state like Utah would have been in play, given what you've just described, but it wasn't. He won this state. Look at what some people call a blue or a much more moderate county like Salt Lake County, and look at the success that we saw Republican candidates have in Salt Lake County. If you look across this country, we are as a country a melting pot. You've got a Democrat Party that wants to divide us by race and gender. Some people call them the latte liberals, the limousine liberals. The everyday person of this country that makes it the melting pot that it is, they're identifying with Republican candidates and a Republican Party, and I love it. I'm excited about it.
Okay, Jim, let's bring you into the conversation now. Democrats suffered some losses on election night here locally and across the country. Every single Republican incumbent in the House won. Only one so far in the Senate lost. So any rebranding in order for the Democrats on a national level?
Well, let's talk about the state level first, and because Greg is so glowing, he forgot to say the president lost and he got clobbered. It was using Trump's own words, a landslide with 306 electoral votes. He lost the close ones. The Democrats moved into positions that they've never been in before. I'm fine with that, but I'm very concerned about the Utah Democratic Party. I think this was the most cataclysmic election for them in a generation. The party made a decision to go with a moderate conservative Democrat, and they made that decision, and the people of Utah have decided, you know what, if I'm going to vote for a Republican, I might as well vote for a Republican and not a Republican light. The devastation all around
Who are you referring
bad.
to specifically right there?
Who am I referring to?
Yeah.
Shireen, of course, Ben. I'm looking at the last time we were here, and we had 3 or 4 legislative seats, which isn't many when there are 78 members. But nonetheless, the Democrats, look, what happens is the Republicans gerrymander every 10 years. And the election after the gerrymandering is a catastrophe because they picked all the districts. By the time the 8 years roll around, though, they get competitive again. So if you look back over the last 40 years, the last election of the decade is the one that the Democrats do the best. That didn't happen this time. Utah Democrats are going to have to look in their souls.
Glenn, can I point out, I would counter what Jim just said. I don't think it's Republican light. I think you had in Nancy Pelosi and a national narrative with the Democrats of mob rules. Public safety is now a Republican issue, and public safety was pretty intuitive to all Americans at one point. You had a Speaker of the House with a radical agenda that walked members of Congress that were Democrats like Ben McAdams down the plank, requiring their fidelity to some very radical policies of which Utahns don't subscribe to. And so I think you have, it's not that Democrats or that the electorate said, well, they look just like a Republican, we may as well vote for a Republican. You have, sadly, with the Republicans in Utah, and this is happening nationally, they are not identifying with this radical socialist defund the police type of narrative that you're seeing. It is alienating the everyday people of our country. And look, like I said, as a Republican, every member of Congress that was elected that's a Republican this year is a minority, a female, or a veteran. What a great melting pot. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Jim, that is a question I brought to you in the beginning. On the national level, is the party in need of a rebrand?
Well, I think we did pretty well. We took the White House. That doesn't happen. Presidents get reelected a second term most of the time. Something extraordinary has to happen. And Joe Biden was the guy. Democrats, the progressives.
But on a night that you take the White House, should you not do better in the House and Senate as well?
It was a weird election, and the Republicans.
I have my theory on that, but I won't go there.
Made up a lot of stuff, that just wasn't so. They ran a good campaign, but they lost the big enchilada. But I guess we're going to get to the Ben McAdams, Burgess Owens campaign, because I think that typifies in a lot of ways the repugnant state of the Republican Party, and especially the Utah Republican Party.
Let's get into that a little bit more. Greg, we saw that seat flip. Ben McAdams only held it for one term, and we saw a lot of candidates early lining up and kind of testing the waters, but saying, no thanks, I'm not going to do it. Burgess Owens sticks with it, and he turns that seat. How was he able to do that?
Well, I think you did have some good candidates that stepped forward. I thought the Republican primary for that seat was a tough race that Burgess won. Again, the national narrative for Democrats does not match the values of the state of Utah. That was a seat that's probably one of the most Republican seats that a Democrat member of Congress holds in America. He won that seat by 700 votes or so. To just walk whole step with Nancy Pelosi the way he did, not showing that independence, I think was a mistake, certainly in hindsight. But I will tell you that Ben was a known quantity as a mayor of Salt Lake County, but it just goes to show that the message of the Democrat Party nationally, especially when they want every member to toe the line with that aggressive agenda they have, the people of Utah said no thank you.
Okay, but in the 4th District, polling had shown that the district was happy with Representative McAdams. We saw him come out with commercials. Well-known Republicans, one, your good buddy, Mayor Walker in Draper,
every time he was on,
him.
someone called me. I know that.
So why did that fall flat, Jim?
It fell flat because gerrymandering is the first reason, of course. Ben did really. Salt Lake County has 1.1 million people, and it doesn't have its own congressman. They take the people of liberal Salt Lake City and they tie them in with Fairview, and they tie them in with Juab County so that they can disembowel the votes of the people in Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City. That's absurd. Salt Lake City, with a third of the state's population, deserves its own congressperson. And hopefully the legislature, well, hope springs eternal, will do something about it.
If that premise was true, he wouldn't have won that seat in the first place in 2018. He won a seat that was drawn that way.
There is an argument, though, that those initiatives of 2018 were very big, drew a very big turnout.
Let's get back to the race, though, if I can for a minute, Glenn. Ben McAdams is a kid from the west side of Bountiful, single mom with a big family. She's a school teacher. He ends up in Columbia with a law degree, one of the brightest human beings around, a man as honest as the day is long, a decent man, respected the opinions of everybody. And this clown who's elected is already humiliating Utahns. He hasn't even been sworn in yet. You know, he gets on Fox News. That's an unfair
characterization.
He gets on Fox News, first thing after he's elected, and he's raising money, and he says, I was cheated in the election, and somebody ought to go to jail. Give me a break.
Okay,
that's what we're going to have.
I don't know what he's talking about.
We have about 30 seconds left.
Is that what we need in Washington?
No, let me tell you something. You don't have to besmirch Burgess Owens in talking about
who
Ben McAdams is. There is no place in the Democrat Party for moderates or blue dog Democrats who were conservative in nature, represent more conservative districts. There is no place for them in the National Democrat Party, and that is a big problem with your party going forward, Jim. If anyone needs a rebranding right now, it would be them, but don't do it. I kind of like where we're at. I absolutely expect and hope that our Republicans will represent the middle class.
We're going to have to end it on that note. We did have Burgess on the night
he brings a dog, he gets a sympathy. Look at that. You can't bring a dog on.
We did have Burgess on the night.
Everybody's going to love the dog. I got no chance.
We did have Burgess on the night the race was called, and he did not bring that up. And,
he was nice.
And we definitely do not see any sign of inappropriate behavior on the behalf of the Salt Lake County Clerk.
News.
All right, gentlemen, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here. Stay with us.
Thanks.
We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after.
Does your dog bite?
We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The new governor and other elected state officials will soon take the oath of office. Utah Inauguration Day is set for January 4th. The general legislative session begins that same month. Opening day is Tuesday, January 19th, and the presidential inauguration is the following day, Wednesday, the 20th. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com, or you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Just log on and search Glenn Mills, ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your day. We hope to see you again next week as we go Inside Utah Politics.